The death of the scientist in Poppy Playtime was not a simple accident. Everything was meticulously planned from the beginning. Each of the horrible actions of the scientists gradually wrote how they were going to die. So let's see how the endings of each of the scientists in Poppy Playtime happened. Now, to make everything clearer, let's first rule out the most popular idea. Not all of them were just victims of crazy monsters. Most people agree that the whole attack by the experiments happened just because the experiments got out of control and acted on instinct. But come on guys, let's remember they're not just simple beasts. They're actually human consciousnesses. The experiments can feel, think, and remember. And just as they cared for some people, they also felt a lot of hatred and resentment toward others. But it's not like they're stupid, guys. The experiments can also remember the names and actions of each scientist. If Playtime Company had thought about this, would they have brainwashed them or used some kind of hypnosis to make them forget everything? Anyway, now with this, I ask you, do you still think this was just a simple incident, or do you think all of this was actually planned and there was a mastermind behind it all? The prototype. But don't worry, the sick part is just beginning. After a long time of being studied, the prototype knew that the only way to be free was to join forces with all the other experiments. With everything he had learned about Playtime Co., he had more or less an idea of what he had to do to free himself from all the scientists. In one of those few escapes, he made the decision, an opportunity to communicate and persuade other experiments to seek justice and freedom, even if it was in the worst possible way. He was the one who shared the ideas with the experiments that they had the possibility to take control and thus stop suffering at the hands of the scientists. It was also here where cases like the famous death of Theodore happened, the boy who is inside Catnap's body. All as part of a great plan. This plan can be deduced if we analyze each of the scientists' deaths. Let's start by looking at Preston's death while he was alive. He wasn't the main villain, nor was he the one giving the final orders. But for obvious reasons, he wasn't so innocent either. Let's just say he was part of the staff and all these horrors. The difference is that on certain occasions he showed empathy. He talked to the experiments as if they were poor orphans, and besides, he felt sorry for them. He wasn't the typical bad guy who just treated them like merchandise. In fact, if we remember a bit of his story, he was quite confused when he started working at Playtime Company.
I still don't understand why they hired me, a biologist in a company.
And as he learned about the factory's true intentions, he did everything he could to try to reveal the whole truth. He even avoided greeting the orphans because he already knew what awaited them, and this was probably what condemned him. Despite knowing everything, he never had enough courage to stop all these abuses, but the truth is that he lacked the courage to report all these abuses. And he waited until the very last moment. But something very important, how does the prototype treat him? He doesn't massacre him or crush him from the very beginning. In fact, it seems like the prototype actually liked him enough to give him one of the worst punishments. To experiment on him and turn him into a bunch of pieces of expert, so his end is not a quick death. The prototype made sure to transform him and make him go through all the cruelty he took part in. Despite having everything to completely destroy Playtime Co., he was practically forced to experience in his own flesh the horrors of Playtime Company. His greatest punishment was not death. Rather, it was never being able to escape from what he allowed. Miss Gracie Greene, the cruelest brainwashing supervisor in the world, Gracie didn't get her hands dirty with machines. Instead, she was in charge of preparing the orphans. She showed them videos to brainwash them and convince them to accept their new identity as toys. The cruelest part is that when someone resisted, she was the one who ordered them to be sent to the bad toys box, where they ended up being shredded. When the time for joy came, she tried to hide, but was found and subdued by the smiling creatures and Baba Chops. Baba was alone.
We're going to hurt you, Mrs. Gracie. We have something very special for you.
But they didn't kill her because death was too simple for someone as cruel as her. The prototype decided to turn her into a live test subject and transformed her into Lily, subjecting her to the same brainwashing she imposed. Her suffering was brutal. She endured 122 days of conditioning, much more than anyone else, and she was the one who resisted the most, until finally she broke. She lost her sanity, developed fragmented identities, and became obsessed with her former body. She was psychologically tortured by the prototype, and in the end, she simply died at the hands of Player. Thomas Clark. Considering that Thomas consciously participated in all the projects of Playtime Company, of course he deserved the hatred of all the experiments done with orphans. Since he made the decision to become an experiment, he signed his own sentence. Actually, he thought the others would welcome him with a strong and warm embrace. Brother, you practically ruined their lives. In fact, they didn't even have to plan his death. The experiments made him pay for everything they went through. It's for this reason that after being turned into brawn and locked up with the others, he ended up being devoured and then torn apart by everyone. Let's remember that the others knew he wasn't an orphan, but rather a worker from Playtime Company, so they took revenge in the most horrific and savage way possible. I can't imagine what went through the scientists' minds when they decided to put Brawn together with the other orphans. Man, that's really dumb. Anyway, Thomas's death was quick, but very visceral. They basically made him suffer while he was alive until he died in a very explicit way. And what about the witch in this story, Jessica Newman? She wasn't just another face on the paperwork. She could swear she was one of the most aware people in the factory. And of course, she was aware of everything that happened, and still, she decided to be part of the project. Jessica grew up inside Playcare, the same place where she later worked as a scientist, and she was also part of the team that created and reprogrammed living experiments within Playtime Company. She was one of those who participated in the Big Bodies Initiative, helping to transform real people into living toys. Just like Catnap and even Thomas Clark, she was torturing these little ones. We would all think that someone who lived through and experienced all these similar things would have at least a little more empathy, right? Well, in Jessica's case, that wasn't so, friends. She kept acting like a heartless beast. She didn't have even a shred of empathy. Even the prototype himself admits that she wasn't kind to him at all. We were never very kind. Who are you, Dr. Newman? At least Preston was. And obviously, all the experiments always took this into account. For that reason, Mommy Longlegs tried to attack her when she tried to interview her. The worst part of all is that she always tried to justify herself and blame others. She even tried to convince the prototype that the only one to blame for all this was just Leif Pierre. Jessica doesn't receive the same sentence as any regular employee. She is confronted and destroyed by the prototype himself, face to face. Not just any experiment finished her off. With this, it's pretty clear to us that Jessica was very involved with the transformation of the prototype, because of all the hatred with which he talks about her. And just as the prototype decided to take revenge against some, there are others who paid for their actions at the hands of their own companions. As happened with Harley Sawyer, it's important to mention his death because this guy was one of the most ruthless. Even since his childhood, he was responsible for many experiments, including Catnap, Yarnaby, and even DOE. But he never showed compassion for anyone, and even tortured the prototype himself to get information. His death was not quick. He was punished by his own colleagues and destroyed by the prototype himself. So we can say that his punishment was quite fitting, considering he was a horrible person. Because come on, getting trapped in a computer isn't very nice to say the least, especially if you didn't even realize when you were put in there. Isn't that right, guys? Harley Sawyer was turned into a computer against his will because he didn't even realize when all of this happened. He just woke up and was already there. But let's think about this. It's most likely that in the future Harley Sawyer will die again. Since at the end of episode 5 we could see that apparently he made some kind of backup of himself. We continue with Bruno White and scientist number 4. These two worked as a team together with Harley Sawyer, sharing the same ideas. Bruno was a mastermind, almost at Harley's level, but he still held the second place. He led experiments like the Bonesaw Bunny one, but when Sawyer became an experiment, Bruno took his place, and, in fact, he was the one who would turn Sawyer into a machine, making this one of his greatest achievements. For this reason, he earned Dr. Sawyer's hatred, and so he would be massacred during the hour of joy by all the toys. Instead, the so-called scientist number 4 followed orders from these two. He was involved in almost all the experiments created by Dr. Sawyer, such as Huggy Wuggy and even the prototype itself, since he had considerable knowledge about it. His death occurred during the hour of joy, and he was probably killed by Huggy Wuggy himself. In fact, the hour of joy was when most of the scientists' deaths occurred. Possibly, each experiment took revenge against their assigned scientists, just like with the deaths of scientist number 3. The scientists of Clarice, Carmine McCabe, and scientist 1 and 2. But there is only one who doesn't appear anywhere, and I'm talking about Leif Pierre. Leif Pierre. Was he the main boss of Playtime Company, the arrogant and ruthless mind behind the experiments? He was responsible for the Big Bodies project and was aware of everything that was happening inside the factory. He was the one who had the real power. But here's the strangest part. Leif's name never appears in any massacre or murder. We don't see him suffer. Like the other scientists, Leif is never confronted face to face by any of the experiments, not even by the prototype itself. Instead, his voice appears on old tapes warning us about the plant's safety, mocking intruders, or justifying failed experiments. His attitude from the beginning was arrogant, violent, and completely lacking in empathy, treating employees and experiments alike as if they were worthless. And if we remember, he survived the main disaster at the factory, the hour of joy. Meanwhile, others simply died or were directly attacked by the prototype, but we never got to see him face the consequences of his actions. And honestly, I don't think the prototype has forgotten that he exists, knowing that he was the masterpiece. So, from everything we know, it's now very clear that the prototype isn't just killing randomly, or because he's hungry. He takes care of evaluating, remembering, and acting when he decides it's time. And if Leif Pierre still hasn't received his judgment, then his future appearance isn't a possibility. We have to see him pay for everything. And this is what they're trying to show us with the video home system tapes, audio tapes, and even notes that we've had so far. They weren't just simple accidents caused by monsters who don't know what they're doing. But now, the biggest question is, what will happen to Player in the end? If Player was also an employee, is he the next one? For now, we don't know. But before we go, I have a little reflection for you. It's like, bro, it's as if you created a homunculus and it ended up killing you. What the fuck? So now you know, friends. That's all for today. Leave your thoughts in the comments and I'll see you next time.